Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Eco Mindset Podcast. Today, we're going to be discussing Cuba. As some people may have heard, Donald Trump has threatened to impose sanctions on any country that sends oil to Cuba. Of course, after the invasion of Venezuela, Cuba is left in very dire circumstances. There's been a lot of threats from the Trump government that sort of hint at regime change in Cuba. Mexico has been pressured into stopping the delivery of oil to Cuba. And at the moment, while we're recording this podcast, there's no oil on the way to Cuba from any other country, placing this island nation in very difficult circumstances. And of course, Canada has a very long historic relationship and friendship with the people of Cuba. And so I'm joined today by Samantha Hislop, who is in charge of the Canada-Cuba network. That's a group that's involved with solidarity between the two countries. And she's joined to tell us a bit about the network and also to share her assessment of the current situation that the people of Cuba are facing.
Thanks a lot, Alex. Yeah, I'm one of the co-chairs of the Canadian Network on Cuba, and our network is made up of 24 organizations across the country that are, do work in solidarity with Cuba. It also includes unions and peace organizations and even political parties. But the common goal and the reason that this network was formed in 2002 was to promote collaboration and cooperation and friendship with the Cuban people, to work and advocate against the U.S. blockade of Cuba, which has been in place for 64 years now. The ties between Canada and Cuba go back 80 years. We've had 80 years of uninterrupted diplomatic relations. And the solidarity movements in Canada, even though our network was formed in 2002, some of our organizations began back in the early 70s. So this work spans many, many decades, and we have we're represented by many demographical groups and different generations across the country that do this work with Cuba. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and as far as the current situation goes, you explained it a bit. Today's February 5th. Last week on Thursday evening, Donald Trump signed an executive order threatening 100% tariffs on any country that provides oil to Cuba, either selling oil to Cuba or even humanitarian aid to Cuba in the form of oil. So they're effectively coercing every other country, threatening them from trading with Cuba. And every country obviously needs oil. There's not a single country on the planet that doesn't require oil to function as an economy and a society. Some countries are more self-sufficient depending on what they have internally, domestically, as their resources and what they produce. Cuba produces right now about 40% of its domestic needs. It does have some of its own oil. Um, because of the decades of sanctions, that has meant a lack of investment in their own infrastructure, their capacity to produce more oil internally, and also to maintain and upgrade their electrical grid and their system that way and modernize it. So they've got an aging grid, which they've been trying to work on, especially in the recent years. They've done a lot of investment in renewables. China has really helped out and stepped in on that front, I would say in the last 2 years, especially with renewables, especially solar. But as it stands right now, Cuba still needs to import oil to meet its daily needs, to function and be productive. So what this means right now, after the attack on Venezuela a month ago on January 3rd, where they effectively, attacked, bombed, killed about 100 people, Cubans and Venezuelans in Venezuela, and kidnapped the president of Venezuela and his wife. Since then, Venezuela has not been selling oil or providing oil to Cuba. And then just recently, last week, there was from Mexico, unfortunately, Pemex, the state oil company of Mexico, canceled a shipment to Cuba, presumably because they're evaluating what the consequences are going to be of these threats of tariffs from the United States. Mexico is I can never pronounce it, and I want to say NAFTA, but UMSCA, however you say that silly acronym that it is now. But obviously, the Mexican economy is very integrated with the United States, and a lot of American corporations are in Mexico. So Mexico has said that they're going to be doing everything that they can to they're already sending humanitarian aid, as they always have. They've always assisted Cuba, and Cuba has assisted Mexico as well. I can go into that a little in a bit, but and they're also trying to find some kind of diplomatic solution or a way to still sell oil to Cuba. So there's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes that we don't know. China has declared that they will do everything they can to provide all material assistance needed to Cuba in this situation, and they've denounced this measure. And Russia as well made a comment, I think it was either early today or late yesterday. They said, we sell oil to Cuba, like we're not, we've historically sell oil to Cuba, and we don't see any reason to stop now. So there it's very difficult right now because we're feeling like, okay, like who's stepping up, when's the next shipment gonna come, and what's the consistency gonna be. So that's the concern. It's just like the unknown. um in Cuba right now, things are functioning pretty much normally as they have been for quite some time. These policies, even though they've just tightened because of this measure, and there's going to have to be a reorganization of resources in Cuba to meet the basic needs of the people. Um, the Cuban people have been dealing with this for many decades, so it's a continuation of a policy.
It's not brand new, right?
It's not brand new. It's just become more severe,
Yeah.
and very coercive, and it's always has been extraterritorial, the sanctions, because it's not a bilateral trade embargo. That always has to be emphasized. It's not just the U.S. saying we're not going to trade with Cuba. It's the U.S. saying any country or corporation who trades with Cuba is going to be subject to the consequences that we set. So, for example, any ship that delivers goods to Cuba cannot dock at an American port for 6 months. So that's a pretty huge deterrent in and of itself. If it's in Cuba, like the United States has been the largest market globally up until this point. So of course they're going to want to be stopping in the United States. So if they're going to choose between Cuba and the US, well, Cuba gets left behind, right? That's what
And
happened.
I'm sure that makes the cost of goods increase in Cuba.
Absolutely. It can sometimes triple the costs, what would be the normal cost. And there's also increased insurance costs for these ships as well with these sanctions because of the risks, the financial and commercial risks. Also, I don't know if you want me to continue explaining the sanctions and the impact that they really have, but I do think that there's not enough education on it. So if you don't mind.
Of course, yeah, and I think it's very relevant, and I think a lot of Canadians were aware of the U.S. embargo and the fact that things can't go back and forth directly between United States and Cuba. But now this idea that sanctions will be applied to any country that helps Cuba, it seems like a really radical isolation measure that's really designed to kind of crush the Cuban economy. And it's very similar to what happened in Venezuela when they started by attacking certain boats and killed over 100 people at what they claimed was drug boats without necessarily having evidence, but then also sanctioning oil tankers and then seizing them. Um, so this is really a radically high pressure tactic that they're applying. And it's very interesting to hear more about the sanctions.
Yeah. Yeah, like, the other thing to keep in mind too is that, um, the messaging system that the banks use internationally to communicate, transactions, and verify transactions between them is called the SWIFT system. Um, there are upcoming alternatives to that, thank God, but so far, that's the dominant system with global commerce and trade. And the United States has full visibility to all of those transactions, even financial transactions that have nothing to do with the US or US corporations. So they have that data, they have access to that. But I don't remember the specifics, but I think it was after 9/11, under the guise of anti-terrorism, they said that they needed to be able to see all of these transactions to stop terrorism or something like that. So that gave them a lot more, even more control um, over these transactions. So they're fining companies, they're canceling contracts with international companies. It's a violation of sovereignty of other countries. It always has been, and it's always affected third parties. They'll even sometimes, if there's a company, there was, I think, a Swiss company that was selling, I want to say, ventilators to Cuba. And this may have been around the pandemic, and an American company bought out, they took over, or they bought that company, and they immediately stopped selling ventilators to Cuba. So it's all of this. It's so they've got their tentacles everywhere. Let's just say that. And then, like you said, it is meant to crush the Cuban economy, and that was the rationale from day one in 1960, the Mallory Memorandum. Um, that Lester D. Mallory, he was I forget his title now. He worked for the U.S. State Department, and he said basically, the revolution is so popular, the people support it, and the only way that we can overthrow the U.S. government is to try to create misery and hunger in the Cuban population, and make sure that they have low wages, just make them suffer basically till they can't take it anymore. So that's the purpose of economic sanctions on any country. It always affects the most vulnerable people the most, the poorest people, the disabled and the sick and the elderly and the children, and it's to make people suffer. Um,
And what's the objective?
they want regime change in Cuba. They always have. Um, for two reasons. I think there's a lot of domestic politics at play because of the exile community in South Florida. It's very, very right wing. And they're just bitter because some of them have relatives who lost their ability to exploit the people and the resources in Cuba. Um, they'll spread a lot of lies about how that all went down, like it was stolen from them. But the truth is that they refused compensation, actually, when the nationalizations occurred. Other countries, companies from other countries, they all settled with the Cuban government, but the exile community in the United States refused to settle because they wanted back that control. And it should be noted that before the revolution in Cuba, 70% of the arable land was owned by Americans, and 90% of the infrastructure and utilities were owned by Americans. Um, so that these people in the United States, they want to go back to that. Okay, that's what they want. So
It's really an incredible story of resistance.
it is, yes, and there's so much you can learn about what Cuba has achieved despite all of this too. They've got a higher literacy rate still than the United States. They had significantly lower infant mortality rate up until actually just this past year. They reported in Cuba that the infant mortality rate has gone up, and that's directly linked to the sanctions because there could be an unavailability of life-saving medications and hospital.
This is just insane, right? That you have infants that are suffering and have these deadly conditions, and that I think often the treatment exists, right? And they are saying like, no, we will not send the treatment. We will let those people die for ideological reasons to try and stick it to Cuba. It's really an incredible lack of humanity.
Yeah, and that's why I would say to anybody who's not sure what to believe, if you're online or you're reading something, I would say to you, if it's a Cuban that is for this kind of policy, that wants people in Cuba to suffer, and they're saying that it's for freedom, that's not the Cuban voices you should be listening to. We have to scrutinize a little bit better, and analyze a little bit better. It's not just listen to X voices in X country, because they're not all the same. Um, and so you have to look at what the interests are that are at play. any person, any honest and decent person would be absolutely against the US blockade of Cuba. They wouldn't want that for their family and friends for their own, like you said, ideological, depraved reasons and their opportunism. Some of them think that, if the U.S. overthrew the Cuban government, that they would get preferential treatment in the new Cuba in their business aspirations and things like that. Like there's a lot of there's a mentality there, so that they see that opportunities. There's a lot of opportunism. Um, our family live in Cuba, and we have seen, like my spouse was born in the mid '70s, and from what he tells me, like he had the best youth, the best childhood and the best youth that you could imagine, better than I did here in Canada, even though I had a little bit more materially, like just the experience, the society, the organization, the institutions and the things that kids had access to and people had access to that they never did before and that we don't even have access to here, like sports and culture and music, and community. These things were all provided. Everybody was included. And that's also what the US seeks to destroy, is that example. Um, and Cu in this hemisphere, Cuba kind of is the lone example of, well, in the world, I would say. Cuba is very unique, but it's the only socialist country in our hemisphere, and, they've shown so much solidarity with the world, really, um, uh, whether it's literacy campaigns. Honduras was declared free of illiteracy just last year from the Yo Si Puedo program. It's a literacy program that Cuba helped them implement and send teachers, and they've done it for other countries too.
They sent doctors to Gaza as well.
Yeah, they sent, and there's also Palestinians right now studying in for free in Cuba to become doctors. So that's right, they've got the Latin American School of Medicine in Havana, which takes students from, marginalized students from poor countries, even from the US actually. And they train them for free. As long as they'll go back and provide medical care to their communities, then that's the criteria, and we will educate you, and you can become a doctor. Anybody with the capability, with the merit, can go to medical school, basically, and that's why Cuba has so many doctors. But and other things too that they've shared with the world. During COVID, they sent doctors to Italy. There was a big crisis with COVID in Italy. There was Operation Miracle or Operation Milagro, which was, I think, in Venezuela. They restored eyesight to people in rural communities that had cataracts. And sadly, actually, right now, for the past, I think, year or so in Cuba, it's been really hard to get cataract surgery because they don't have the ocular lenses. It's a very simple procedure, but they just don't have the simple supplies, right? So, my in-laws, for example, both of them have cancer, and I thank God that they were diagnosed, uh, before the past couple of years, so they were able to get quick chemo, like very rapid chemo, surgery, radiation right away, and they're still here because of it. If that were to happen, if they were diagnosed right now, um, it could be a different story. So people die because of these sanctions and the shortages that it causes. Yeah. I don't know if you want me to go into something else, but if there's anything else I should.
Well, one thing I'd be interested in is the international reaction to these threats that Trump made last week. Um, has there been? Well, you mentioned that there are some countries that are saying that they're going to support, like Russia and China. I believe you said we're going to send some oil. What has the Canadian response been?
Uh, the Canadian response outside of the solidarity organizations, like from the Canadian government, has been essentially to tarnish their tourism industry. And they've really been doing a good job of, I guess, I guess it's for political reasons, scaring Canadians, and it is starting to have an impact. The travel advisory is, I forget what the level is called. It's like a yellow, it's like a medium, moderate, middle kind of advisory. It's the same travel advisory that has existed for Mexico and the Dominican Republic for quite some time. Um, but they raised it because of that announcement from Donald Trump, and they're kind of preemptively making assumptions. And in the advisory, it says disruptions or getting stranded in Cuba. And I think we should talk about that because if you understand how the industry works, the airport authorities communicate with each other constantly, and they verify fuel levels and the ability to refuel. Like flights won't go to Cuba if they aren't able to refuel. Like that's not how it works. So Canadian tourists should not be worried that they're going to be stuck in Cuba because there's no fuel for the planes. Does
Yeah, and I've seen, especially in the Quebec francophone media, story after story about how Cuba is unstable and how tourists go there and they're unhappy with the food and stuff like that, and it really seems like they're trying to discourage people from going there. And to have the Canadian government add this travel advisory to scare people further, it seems to be another way to cut the foreign currency coming into the country. And I actually went down there myself in October of last year, and people were saying that when the COVID crisis hit and tourism went almost to zero, that it cut off a huge flow of capital into the country, which of course they use, to import a lot of the food, the oil, and the goods that they need. So it seems like instead of supporting the Cuban people and the Cuban government by saying Canada will defy Trump and we will send food and fuel down there to, a country that we're allied with, who's been a longtime friend of Canada. You have almost 1 million Canadians per year visiting Cuba, which is really incredible because the population of Canada is only around 40 some million people. So it's a huge number of people that are going down there. And so instead of sending support and solidarity and standing up to Trump the way that Carney was talking about doing it in Davos, about how middle powers need to band together and this sort of thing, it's the new world order. Instead, they're just discouraging people from going down there. So it's a way of kind of supporting the U.S. sanctions rather than countering them.
That's absolutely right. Tourism is vital to the Cuban economy, and it supports the other sectors like their public health sector, agriculture, food, logistics. Like it's all connected, of course. Um, and they need the foreign currency as well to be able to buy and import on the international market. And there's a growing private sector in Cuba as well of small businesses that are also connected to tourism. So Canadians going to Cuba, whether you're staying in a hotel in an all-inclusive or staying in a private home, you're supporting the Cuban people and you're supporting their economy. Um, it is it is really disappointing so far, and that's what the Canadian Network on Cuba is trying to work on right now, is getting the awareness out about this and how to really support the Cuban people and trying to pressure the government to do the right thing. We're an exporter of oil, and it's the same type of oil that that Venezuela has too. It's very similar. So Cuba would be ready to receive that and refine it and use it. Um, if we're a sovereign country, we should be defying this, or we countries need to defy this.
Yeah.
Like, what does it mean? Like, what does it really mean if this can stand? Um, if we don't if we don't take a unified stance against this, then that means there's no sovereignty. We're at the whims of the coercion of the United States regime, essentially. They're dictating to us who we can and can't trade with. That's a sovereign right. Every country has the right to trade with whom they choose. Um, Besides the fact that it's a huge human rights violation that the United States is trying to perpetrate with this executive order. So it's not just about Cuba. It means a lot more than that. It means something for all countries, but especially in our hemisphere. And the United States is emboldened right now. They were blowing up ships with fishermen. They were claiming that they were drug traffickers, and they weren't. They had no proof of that. There was no trial, no arrest. They were just killing people. And everybody stood by and watched. And our Navy is actually participates in patrols in the Caribbean and shares intelligence with the United States Navy. So it's very likely that um, there was cooperation and Canadian involvement in those operations. Um, but we can't just stand by and do nothing, because who's going to be next? Which country is going to be next? I think Mexico. I think I know there's a lot of Mexicans that support Cuba, and I know that the government wants to continue supporting Cuba, and I think they're trying to figure it out. But I think it's going to take unity among countries too, among the larger economies. Um, you know, like say if Brazil and Mexico and Colombia is important too, if they came together, Canada too, but I don't really expect it. You know what I mean? But that kind of leadership and standing up and being independent, having an independent foreign policy and an independent trade policy, if we don't have that, we don't have sovereignty. And I will be the first person to acknowledge that in Canada, we have a lot of internal contradictions when it comes to sovereignty of peoples. But the primary contradiction right now, when it comes to sovereignty, is the sovereignty of Canada. And we have to at least preserve that in the face of the United States.
Yeah, it's very difficult to follow the logic of the Canadian government because we go from Carney making this speech about the New World Order and this sort of thing. And then just yesterday, I saw that our Foreign Affairs Minister, Anita Anand, was in Washington, and she's posting a photo on her social media, literally hugging Marco Rubio, like really, really close there. And it's not just a photo that the media took or something. She published it on her own social media. So which one is it? Is it elbows up and Canada's an independent country and we're exerting our sovereignty, or are we just puppets of the United States? I mean, I have a really hard time following it. And of course, Carney didn't mention the United States by name in his speech in Davos, but it's a big contradiction. And I think it shows that the Canadian people want to exercise our sovereignty. We want to stand up to the United States. And I mean, I guess that's why Carney must be making these speeches. But then when it comes to the actions that they're actually putting forward and what they're actually telling the United States in the closed door meetings, it seems to be the complete opposite. It's like, take whatever you want. We will do whatever you say. We will not help the countries that you're attacking. And maybe we'll even participate with you in the attacks and in the regime change operations.
That's exactly it. I mean, our government we follow their foreign policy, the US foreign policy, practically to a T. As soon as they do something or say something, the next day we're saying the exact same thing. Like the rhetoric is almost the same. And yeah, my heart just dropped. I'm not a fan of Anita Anand, but looking at that photo, yeah, it wasn't even just a photo op. It was like buddy buddy, haha, like laughing it up, like.
Yeah, it was very weird. It was a lot of physical contact too. It's like very strange for any kind of diplomatic photo, or any kind of like political photo. Like they were really close together. They're trying to project this image. It's completely insane. I have such a hard time following their logic.
Yeah, what they say to the Canadian public really doesn't match what they do. So yeah, I mean, I all we can do is try to push them. We should be getting closer to Cuba. We should be importing. We could have trade in agriculture, our farmers and their farmers, like medicine. We have such a shortage of doctors. They can send teams we can sign contracts with their doctors and their nurses to fill those gaps while we domestically figure things out. I'm not saying to poach or brain drain health professionals from Cuba. I'm against that. We do that to other countries. We still do it. We need to resolve internally that issue. But in the meantime, they've offered too. They have offered I forget the name of it, the Association of Manitoba Southern Chiefs. I'm probably getting that wrong, but during the COVID pandemic and in the first year, those chiefs they met with Cubans and they asked Cuban doctors to come, and they signed a contract there was reserves that signed contracts, nations that signed contracts, and the Cuban doctors were ready to come and take care of people that were infected with COVID because there were no doctors, no nurses in those communities. And Chrystia Freeland to the press said, no, we're not going to give them visas. We don't need Cuban doctors. We have enough doctors in Canada. We can deal with this ourselves, basically. And nothing was done. So yeah, there's so much that we can collaborate on and work with, and so many ways that Canada can be a better ally of Cuba. But we need to have a backbone. Um, and like I said, it doesn't, Cuba is vital for the global South countries. It, it, I can't really, I can't emphasize enough what a blow that would be to people living in the global South who admire Cuba. They aspire to have a society like Cuba. They know that Cuba is sanctioned. They know it's not easy in Cuba. But they know they see Cuba as an example, and that's something what they would want in their country, in their society. The way that that would set people back decades, progressive movements, environmental, like the environment, all kinds of social issues. I mean, it would be truly devastating. It's such a big blow. It would set us back decades in progressive and solidarity movements. Um, so, and Cuba's, they're very resilient. They're very organized. I watched the president speak for 2 hours today, and they're talking about how they're reorganizing things in Cuba. First of all, let me say that tourism is okay in Cuba. The only reason that now some flights are getting canceled is because Canadians are canceling their plans. So once, they're not going to send up an empty plane. So if the plane's not full enough, they're going to cancel that flight. So there are flight cancellations happening, and it's unnecessary because those hotels, they have autonomous power supplies, they have backup generators, they have solar power. They're prepared for this, and they're not going to be receiving tourists if they don't have the capacity to take care of them. They don't want a disaster on their hands. Like, it's not even logical to think that they would be, telling Canadians and other people to visit Cuba if they couldn't accommodate them.
Yeah, and from what I understand, they've also put a priority on preserving the stability of the electrical grid, like in the tourist areas, and that those hotels are not usually subject to large blackouts anyway.
Yeah, because that's how some people have this weird idea that they should just stop tourism for a while to save the oil for the population. Tourism brings in so much more profit. It's not that doesn't make sense mathematically. It like I don't know how to get people to understand that, but you can't shut down a whole industry. That's not logical, like from a financial standpoint. So I know the government's also taken measures. They've been installing more solar panels and systems in uh, health institutes and buildings, and also in homes of people that are really vulnerable that might rely on a machine to stay alive, for example, whether it's for breathing or maybe dialysis or something like that. So they're trying to rapidly take care of the most vulnerable people. They're also, I think they're going to be reorganizing the family food basket, which are the free food that every family is entitled to in Cuba. They're going to have to say only like the lower income and the lowest income people will be entitled to that now, the most vulnerable. So they're doing what they can to take care of the population. There's other things too. I have no idea what kind of humanitarian aid is coming in. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if China's stepping up and rolling out more solar at a rapid pace. I mean, we've seen how they've been able to like build a hospital in a week. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, but I think they're like, yeah. So, I would say like there's no reason for Canadians to be afraid to go to Cuba. It's stable. The people
Yeah.
are carrying on with their life. We went there. I just came back last week, and at our family home, Yeah, we didn't have electricity for most of the day, um, but life goes on. You know, when you're at home, it's not so bad. It's worse for the economy. That's what gets affected, the productivity, right? When there's blackouts. So, you know,
So, for all the Canadians that are listening to us here, we're almost out of time, but I wanted to ask you, what can Canadians do that are outraged about this situation? Clearly, visiting Cuba this winter would be a good idea, maybe filling your suitcase with some medicine and critical supplies. What else can people do?
yeah. So, if you want to get actually involved in solidarity or join an organization, go to CanadianNetworkOnCuba.ca and find your local member organization in your city. We have groups in all major cities in Canada if you really want to get involved. If you want to donate, you can donate by an e-transfer because the Canadian Network on Cuba sends containers every single month to Cuba, material aid, medical supplies, and some food too, like powdered milk, beans, rice, things like that. Every month we send at least one container. So if you want to donate to that, you can send an e-transfer to donate@CanadianNetworkOnCuba.ca. We launched a petition 2 weeks ago before this executive order was signed. E-petition 7082. If that's the if you want to look it up, just go to petition 7082. But really, the best thing to do is to just visit our social media pages because all of this information will be there. Whether you want to make a donation for material aid, whether you want to sign the petition asking the government to do more trade with Cuba and to not comply with U.S. sanctions. Um, uh, like you said, travel to Cuba, go to Cuba. It's the safest place that you can visit. It really is. You will be fine. If there's flights going to Cuba, you should go to Cuba, support the Cuban economy, support the Cuban people. Don't abandon Cubans at this moment. That's exactly what this campaign by the US is about. It's not just to cause suffering and more extreme blackouts, but they want to scare people from visiting Cuba because they know how important that is for the economy. So visit Cuba and support the economy and speak out about this.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you very much, Samantha, for sharing your time with us and for all of the very important work you're doing and supporting the Cuban people. And I think it's important for everybody to get involved and try and do something, try and pressure the Canadian government to break this blockade and to supply the Cubans with the vital things that they need to stand up and defy Trump. So thank you once again for coming on, and we'll continue to follow the subject of Cuba going forward.
Thanks so much, Alex.
Thanks.